Hi, I'm David Reddy. This is an interview with Steve Schwarzer, a charter member of FABA, at the annual meetings of the Florida Artist Blacksmith Association in Ocala, September 30th, 2016. Hi, Steve.
Hey, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the history of me and the craft.
Why don't we start with a little bit about your background?
Well, I've got a pretty extensive background in metalwork. In the very beginning, back when they had schools that taught metalsmithing and wood shop, and you were able to develop skills, we had a little, the start was a memorable man named Joe Hodge, and he was my 7th grade shop teacher. And the first metal I ever hit hot was in that 7th grade shop class, and we made a chisel, a coal chisel. That was one of the projects. And I think I made a C+ on it. I can't remember for sure, but it sounds like a good thing to say. And that was it for many, many years. And then after high school, I built jet aircraft for a little while, and back in the late 60s. And everybody at that time was a frustrated knife maker, so they'd find any piece of metal they got and they would make something that looked like a knife. And as time went on, I moved to Florida, and I got a job working setting heavy machinery. And on that job site, there was a bunch of people that worked out of the Boilermakers local in Jacksonville. And there was an old guy there that was an old tank guy, the old blacksmith and a chipper and all that stuff, named Wallace Long. And Wallace said, he called me Schwarzer, and it was hilarious, mispronouncing my name, but it was he never could get it, so I quit trying. He said, Schwarzer, why don't you come over and be a Boilermaker? And I said, well, Mr. Long, I said, I'll try. Anyway, I filled out the paperwork, and I got a temporary work card out of there. And he came down, and Mr. Long had basically forgotten me. I was on a job site, and he walked up to me, and he said, Schwarzer, said, how long have you been a Boilermaker? I said, all day, sir. And he kind of laughed. And the old man was telling me about the history of the craft and all that stuff, and I looked, and there was iron shipbuilders and Boilermakers and blacksmiths, and of course the NTM guys that made tanks. And there were no blacksmiths left in the local at all. There were none. There was nobody, because they quit riveting years before I arrived. And this was about 71 or 2, right in there. Anyway, so I bought a book by Alex Beeler, and I read that book. And in that chapter, there was a little chapter on forging knives. And I read that, and I just got on fire. I said, I've got to do this. So I rushed around the countryside and found myself an anvil and a little rivet forge, and I became a bladesmith. And I was living in Palatka, Florida at the time, and I began to try to search around, because I thought I was the only guy in the world doing this. And I began searching around a little bit, and found Dr. Van Arnhem after some time, and he became my eye doctor, but he was also a very close friend, and we worked together on a bunch of the early projects. And that was the beginnings of FABA and Artisan Blacksmith. And we had a couple things. The earliest hammering I remember we did at his house, and it was in 1982. And we had some of the top bladesmiths at that time in the world there at that. We had Schmidt, Don Fogg, and myself, and Pendray, and the whole bunch there in that crew. And of course, Dr. Van Arnhem, he was crazy about blacksmithing. He owned every tool that was ever made for blacksmithing. And of course, he had his henchman, Bill Gishner, running with him. And Bill and I became fast friends. And I learned an awful lot from him. And of course, my focus was on bladesmithing. And I really enjoyed it. And so I forged blades for a while. And one of the funny sidebar stories is I assumed that I was the only guy, and that's what happens when you're isolated. So I was, in my infinite wisdom, I was taking crosscut saw blades, heating them red hot, and cutting them out on the face of my anvil, because I didn't know any better. I mean, I just didn't know. And that was a time when I didn't think you could destroy an anvil, but I assure you it's possible. Anyway, so I was doing that, and then I was doing my 1/4-inch copper rivets from the ground wires off the telephone poles in the neighborhood and that kind of stuff. Maybe I'll cut that part out, but or not. It doesn't matter. Anyway, the L6 is what those saw blades made from. It's very forgiving material on heat treat. And so my buddies were all filleting these big kingfish and the redfish and stuff with them, and they told me I was wonderful, so I assumed that I was. And so I was working on a job in White Springs, Florida, and I heard about a fella on the job that was making knives. And that gentleman's name was Bobby Tyson. And I didn't know Bobby Tyson. I was a Boilermaker, and he was one of those pipe fitter guys, you know. He didn't hang around with them. They were a rough bunch. Anyway, so I had 3 of these old fillet knives, and they were rustic. Well, getting rustic, wrapped up in an old snotty rag in my hip pocket. And what was in my head was, I'm going to go show this guy something about knives. That's what I'm thinking. And so I go over there and I find this guy running down, and he's leaning up against a big acid tank eating his lunch. And I says, "Are you Bobby Tyson?" And he says, "Yeah, I am." I said, "Well, I hear you make knives." He said, well, he's a real humble guy. He said, "Yeah, I try." And he pulled out the most beautiful pocket knife I'd ever seen with stag handles and this mystery steel called D2, and it walked and it talked and it looked better than any factory knife I'd ever seen. And so I began to crab away. I was kind of like trying to turn my body away so he wouldn't see the handle sticking out of my pocket. And he looked at me and says, "Well, you make knives?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And he said, "Well, show me what you do." All I can tell you is he was kind. And I showed him my knives, and he was, like I said, he was very kind, but they were typical of somebody that didn't know. The only thing that made those things work is they were incredibly thin because they were made from those crosscut saw blades. And then he made his fatal error. He invited me to his house after telling me that he had knife books. I didn't even know knife books existed. Yeah. He had books on making knives, and I thought, oh my gosh, people have written about this. This is wonderful. Anyway, I drove straight to Jacksonville. He probably wished he had never let me in the door. I was there every weekend. And he loaned me some of his books, and I read them and began to get an interest in pocket knives. And he was, like I said, was very good to me. And I had a younger sister that was passing with cancer. And she wanted me to make her a knife. And I said, "Well, what do you want?" She wants, "I want a pocket knife." I went, "Okay, I'll do it. I'll do it." And I called Bobby up and I said, "Bobby," I said, "this is a circumstance." I said, "Would you help me make a pocket knife?" He said, "Sure." It took us 2 days to make that thing. And it did everything. And she got that knife, and that was, boy, that was a high point. And so I probably made 50 more before they worked properly. Everybody said, "Why are the springs so strong in these?" I said, "They're manly knives." So you always had to have a cover story for the thing. Anyway, so I started making pocket knives, and then I heard about Damascus steel, the layering of the materials. And of course, Carl and I were getting together about every week or so and doing blacksmithing, and I was hanging out with Tico Rubio and that bunch and learned stuff, and they started having a few gatherings. But my main focus was my knives. I wanted to do knives so badly. Anyway, so I started making the pocket knives, and I heard about this Damascus steel, and I didn't know how to forge weld, and I tried, and everything I made looked like a cabbage on a stick. It was just all these layers. And so I heard about
I've done that.
I heard an old cowboy over there in Williston. Anyway, I went over there, and everybody thought I spent years with Pendray, and we were our friends for many, many years, but I didn't spend much time with him as far as a tutorial situation. I went over, and his dad was still alive then. He was sitting in the shop, and I was going to learn to forge weld. And I drove over there. It was like 2 hours over there, and so I started heating it up. And his dad's facing away from me, looking at a tin wall in the building, reading the newspaper, going, "It's too hot." Was he a magician? How's he not? Oh, he could see the sparks reflecting on the tin. Had it too far down in the air blast, so it was burning. Burn that steel up. Said, "Flatten that out." Anyway, I got my first weld done. I came home and started pattern welding, and it was a disease that took my life over.
Yeah.
And by 1981, I was internationally recognized in writing for my work. and the rest is history. I've taught in Germany, I've had students in from all over the world. Made great friends with most of the people that are still involved. Bill Roberts and John Butler and Skeeter Prather is like an older brother. I love him like my own dad, you know.
He's the one who got me started blacksmithing.
Oh my goodness, and Skeeter's been the demise of several good people that could have gone and made a decent living, and now they decided they'd just rather blacksmith instead. I'll blacksmith till I go broke. But I bought air hammers and every tool known to man to make it. But the Florida Artists and Blacksmith Association, I was active with it for a long, long time. And the problem was my focus was so much on the pattern level, I just finally couldn't attend all the meetings and that sort of thing, kind of drifted away. And now I'm kind of drifting back because I found out over many years of teaching here and abroad that most bladesmiths don't know how to move metal. They can forge weld and they can beat out something that looks sort of like a knife, and then they grind the rest of it to shape. But they never learn the basics of blacksmithing. And the basic of blacksmithing, that's what FABA is all about, is that. And if you've got those basics, then you've got some groundwork to build your building on. Without those basics, and it's just basically slugging the edge on something and hoping it comes out, it's probably not a good thing. And so that's why I've been so involved with it, and I intend to get more involved with it. Right now I'm doing design work for a major knife or gun company, and that's going together. And like I said, I taught up at the New England Metalsmiths School and did 10 days up there in Maine and foundered on lobsters. But one of the, I guess the main points, I wrote for Blade magazine for 10 years or better. I'm writing some more stuff for them now. I found that teaching has its own reward. And that's somebody else's words, but it's so true, because I found out that I can't discover everything on my own. And every student I teach, the way I teach is I open the door to everything. There are no secrets. If you find somebody that has secrets, it usually means they don't know much, and you need to move along somebody that's willing to share. So you're going, but you hold those people sacred that teach you, and you honor them. It doesn't make you any smaller to acknowledge where the nugget came from. And I've always done that in the knife trade and what I do. And so when I teach, I do the same thing. I treat them the same way that I was treated. The guys that really helped me, I never forget them. It doesn't make me any smaller to acknowledge help. And I just went up to teach it at New England School of Metalsmithing, and there were guys there that you would discount in a crowd that were phenomenal artists, did some crazy patterning work, but given just a little direction. And what will happen with that, and it's proven itself sacrosanct in the past, is the minute they discover something new, who they're going to call? Me. And so I physically do not have the time to explore all those paths. And I want to see what's there, but if I've got somebody telling me what's there, it'll save me a trip, kind of thing. It's so it feeds back into itself. And that's how I met my current wife, the new model. had a wife that I love with all my heart, and she passed away suddenly. And Laura and I've been friends, and she was friends with my then wife. And when she passed away, Laura, the joke is, it's an inside joke, that she came down and helped me get through it, so I just kept her. And but she's also a recognized German bladesmith, done work for George Strait and a lot of famous people. I did work for the original Bush. I made fire screens and stuff for some people that own large corporations. I've got knives in museums and private collections all over the world. I taught at the National Forge Museum in Germany in '93. Won awards in Europe and here for what I do. But to me, it's about the latest discovery. And one of the things that I found was, especially, and as long as I'm learning something new, I'm going. And I ran into a young guy that's just phenomenal. There's several of them actually, but the guy's name is Jason Morrissey, and he's out of a glassworking background. The guy's fantastic. and he hadn't had anybody telling him it can't be done. So he's doing stuff with steel that you just outrageous. And I was privileged enough to have him as a student, but I was also able to get the insight on how he does his work. And so it's given me a whole new color palette to paint with.
There you go.
And so I'm running out of time. I need to hurry. I made 69 years old, and I'm thinking about, am I downsizing my shop? No, I'm buying more equipment. So I still have stuff I want to do.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I am.
So bring it to a little bit more of Florida.
Yeah, Florida. I came to Florida because I've been almost everywhere else, and I really liked the blacksmith group here, and I made a lot of friends. The old guys, Rubio and all of them, and some of them I can't even recall the names. It's been so long ago. Jerry Grice and all the bunch, and John Butler. And, you go down there, and they really had something to offer. You know, you could really see. I can see the faces, and I can't remember the names. And
J.C. Hawkins was
oh
one that
my goodness, J.C. I mean, all of them. Even old Clyde was a prize. I love teasing Clyde Payton more than living. I think.
That's a fun thing to do.
Oh, you could light him up just pretty easy, and but I tell you, when we were there at Barberville, we had a lot of fun times and stuff. But this venue you have over here in Ocala is just fantastic. I really like it. It's a good bunch, and getting to see old faces and a lot of new faces. I met some young men today. They're just on fire with this craft, and I thought, what a great opportunity to share. And I met one young man out there. I've got a lot of venues I can drop him into. He's ex-military. He defended us so we can do what we do. And if there's any way I can help him get forward, I absolutely intend to do it. I just had 7 retired German SEAL team guys in my shop from northern Germany, and they were absolutely fascinated with the pattern welding. I fired up the hammer, and we did this big forging thing, and I sent them all home with a little piece of steel. And it turns out they're all from a little area in northern Germany, in Silesia. Well, that's where my family's from. And so I'm probably 3rd, 4th cousins to about half those guys. Family trees don't fork much. But the venue, this hot iron, it's primal. It brings people from all walks of life. You can look at a cross-section of people out here. There's doctors and lawyers and laborers and whatever, but the common denominator is that fire and moving steel. And it doesn't matter whether you're making a squirrel fork or you're making some great vision of art, you're moving iron. And that's what drew my wife into it. She's 106 pounds soaking wet. And I used to use her in demos all the time because she was so tiny. You'd have half a dozen guys standing there in bib overalls that would, the field dress at 350 pounds with a big chew of tobacco and a beer going, man, that's difficult to do. I taught a class up at the NRA school, powder mill class. And they were going, well, I don't know whether I can do that or not. And I said, Laura, I said, come up here and run this. And she come up there with her little self and run the machine, run those hammers and presses like any man out there, and is good at it. And they go, well, is she good? Anybody can. I said, that's the idea. That's, you know, all you got to do is want to. But that's kind of how I got here.
Have you done much with Abana?
No, I haven't. I've done some. I did a lot of stuff in the 80s. And of course, Jack Klum and I are like twin brothers. And Jack and I worked together for years. We're still friends. I had a television crew come over, and then I had a film crew out of New Orleans for a series they were contemplating it. Whether it happens or not, I don't know. But he stopped doing what he was doing to come over for an interview about me and what I do. And when he was up at the big meeting in Utah, he was up there, and he was wearing one of my T-shirts, and he sent me a picture of it. And he says, what do you think about my dress? And I said, that's great.
Yeah.
And I said, that's great. But he a design competition, and one of the people he was competing against was the World Trade Center, and he won.
Wow.
And he's right here in Ocala, Florida.
Wow, I have to interview him too.
You bet. Well, there's I mean, a whole bunch, all the areas have a different crew and a little different mindset. And I think that's good because it brings a lot of a different structure and different positions into the craft where you're not stuck in one little vein.
You want to get it? I can cut it out.
No, that's the problem with those things. I remember when only Dick Tracy had one of those.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but I think what you're doing, teaching the kids, is phenomenal. The problem with me at this point in my life is time. It's time frame. Having the physical time to do it. I'll stop. I only usually train high-end people, and I'm not talking about money people. I'm talking about people with high skill sets that are wanting to go up because I don't have time to teach everybody.
Right, there are people who can do that.
You bet. And I've got a couple local guys that are beginners, but they come in and they help. They'll help me clean the shop or do that kind of stuff, and then I don't mind. I charge for my time if somebody comes and I don't know them, but if there's a knowledge exchange or something that I want to learn, then we will wipe the books clean and go on.
That makes sense.
And that makes sense because we're trading knowledge for knowledge, and knowledge is something that you can't really buy. You can read about it, but you can't see it.
Well, I should be asking you about the Bladesmith associations. Are you active in them?
Sort of. I don't have time for all the political stuff. I'm just not interested in it. I was vice president of the guild for a while and very active with ABS for a while. All those organizations are great for promoting the craft, and I got nothing negative to say about them. But it's like any organization, you wind up with the people that just want to be politicians and control a little stuff. And frankly, I don't have time to argue over how to make a knife. That's been the death sentence of a couple of organizations and the purists and that sort of thing. I found that the biggest judge of your work is the guy handing you the money. If he pays you, feels like your work is worth the money, and you've been honest with him how you presented it and built it and made it, then that's the award. That's better than all the trophies and your buddies patting you on the back. I've got a thing I do, and it's you have people come to you all the time, and they're two different schools, and they rush up to you and they go, I'd like for you to look at my knives and tell me what I can do better. And the first group is somebody that wants to be patted on the head and told they're wonderful, and their cup was full to the brim before they got there. And then there's people that actually want their work evaluated to the best of my ability. And what is beautiful one person may not be beautiful somebody else. It's all subjective. And so what I tell them, I said, if you want my honest view, then I'm going to tell you. I said, if you want me to pat you on the head and tell you you're wonderful, I'll just do that now and we're through. You don't have to take the knives out. And they go, okay. And you can quickly see where their mind goes. And then you get people that will, if this was my knife, I would do it this way. And I always present it, if I were doing it, this is what I would do. Now that may not work for you, but it works for me. And so here are my knives, and let's take a look and see how we can make your stuff better.
So what are you working on? What kind of knives? Are you still doing pocket knives?
Yeah, I still do pocket knives. I do axes, swords, spears. I've got a real high-end pocket knife I'm working on for a client right now that's got that last piece of that hunting scene material that I had left.
Wow.
I was going to keep it for myself, but he offered me enough to part with it. I will sell my children for enough money. I'm sorry to say, but that's the truth. Anyway, you can always make more. And it comes back to people always want a recipe. How'd you do that? How'd you do that? They don't want to put the hours in. They just want the recipe for the biscuits. You might have took your grandma her whole life to get that just perfect, and she can tell you in 3 minutes something that took 15 years to learn. I did the first power metal that was ever done to do with Damascus steel, and it was done in '82. And it's not a brag, I can prove it, because I went to Teledyne to teach a class, and that's where I saw the first powder metal. And I ran into a guy named Gary Runyon that introduced me to it, and he's their powder metal specialist. And I was doing my actual signature in a bar of steel, never been done before. There'd been block letters done back in the probably 1800s in Liège, Belgium, for gun barrels and pictures and stuff. But there was nothing with a real signature in it, and it was my actual signature. And it's a funny story. I don't know whether you got time for it or not, but I'll put it on you. But I've got a friend of mine that owns a wire EDM machine. And it's a numerically controlled machine that has a wire running through it, and it's basically a high-speed erosion, but it looks like a big sewing machine with water, and so it makes these millions of little electrical sparks, and it chews its way through, controlled by a computer, so it will do just exactly what you tell it to. So I wrote my signature, and I gave him a block of steel. It's about a 2x2 block of steel. And I said, I want to do my signature. And so he did it. And of course, with the way I write my name, you almost need a pamphlet to explain who I am. But anyway, it has loops in it, and those little pieces come out. And he cut all that. And so I take it home, I take this block home, and there was hundreds of dollars worth of machine time in this, literally. And he was donating the time. And he's a close friend, and I love him to death. He's just like a brother to me, and he's wired for sound. But anyway, he said, you made this block, so I took it home, and I'm taking these little 10,000 pieces of sheet 200 nickel, pure nickel, trying to get them down in these little cracks, and they weren't going. So I went back over there to him, I said, take that machine and cut this thing in half. I'm going to use it as a die. I'm going to push that stuff in there. And he said, well, that sounds like a good idea, so he did it. And I went and I put all the stuff in there, and I put it in a press to squeeze it, and I crushed that part and destroyed it. It's ruined. And I'll paraphrase what he said when I showed it to him. Golly gee, I wish that hadn't happened. Anyway, that's the way it went. I said, now, Joe, could you make another one? Golly gee, I would love to, I think is what he said. Anyway, so he made me another one. And so I went over to get it, and of course it had all these little loops that had to drop back in, and they're suspended. I'm looking at this thing, and he looks at me and he says, too bad you can't pour that in there. And I went, we can. And I remembered going up to Teledyne, and I bought some nickel powder, flour.
Powder, yeah.
And we rattled that down in there and welded it, and I've still got pieces of it. But that was the first time historically it had ever been done with anything to do with knives. And
how did you get the nickel powder to be nickel again?
Okay, it's jet black and it looks like flour, and I vibrated it down in there. And what happens is with the powder, no matter how tight you pack it, it's got to be reduced by 30% to get the interstice out of it, the little microscopic spaces. Well, as that stuff centers and joins hands, it turns bright silver. So it's wicking in there almost like solder, but not. It's not melting, it's fusing. And it's what they call centering. It's where you start to get an electron exchange, and it starts holding hands. And then as you reduce it, it gets brighter and brighter and more perfect. The secret in any of that, just like that shooting scene I did, is in the control of the reduction of the material. Anybody can make the picture with high-tech machining, but the precise control of reduction without distorting the picture is where I excelled. And that whole challenge of doing that shooting scene, as well as signature and stuff, was a challenge from Darryl Meyer. And Darryl Meyer, he saw my signature and he said, well, that's pretty nice. And then he looked at some other stuff I did, some abstract stuff I did, and he said, why don't you make something real? So that's when I made the Man and the Dog and the Birds. And that thing took months to build. And the control on it is, nobody's repeated it. Because if you bend a straight line, it's a crooked line. It's no longer straight. You bend a curve, it's still a curve, but you bend a straight line and it's a curve. And there's no way to get it back really, other than very special manipulations. So I started all that down in sections and welded all together. Nobody's ever repeated it. So it was a pretty interesting project.
So you really like to push what you can do.
The envelope.
And
I like stepping off a cliff. I just have done it. I've been a risk taker my whole life. I race airboats and cars and motorcycles. I've done karate at a very high level since 1962. I had to quit that because I broke my neck twice.
Oh,
And so that put a stop to that. And then my wife made me quit racing the airboats because I won my first race, and she said, the only place you can go is down, so you're going to stop while you're on top. So did that. But I love Florida. I love the people here and the artist community. I mean, from Jacksonville to South Florida, there's some amazing blacksmiths here and bladesmiths and very creative group. Me and Bill Roberts have been friends since we were tadpoles, and he's right here in Ocala.
tell me about it. Tell me a story that will embarrass Bill Roberts. We need to embarrass more people.
Well, let me think about it. Let me get it. This is not liquor. This is unsweet tea.
Yeah.
Bill and I are philosophically at opposite ends of the pole. So I'm somewhere to the right of the Ayatollah, and he is where he is. But we're best of friends. And what's funny about it is he's so creative. He's like in Oz all the time. He's off in the ether, and I appreciate that. He's always been a free spirit. I don't know. It's just pleasant to be around. I'm trying to think of something ugly I could say about him, but I really can't think of much because every time I get around him, he's just full of knowledge. So he causes me to spend money. That I resent that because he'll come up with some little new tool or gadget and say, "Boy, if you just had one of these, you could do this and that and this and that." My wallet goes flat. He just did that with an induction heater. He said, "You need to have one of these," and he showed me what it did. And I said, "I think you're right." But, that's probably about as negative as I could get. I can get on Bill. There's something else. Now. What is that thing he's driving? A Prius? Some kind of little electric car. And I told him, I said, "Bill," I said, "you need to think about that thing." I said, it's an environmental nightmare." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, have you ever seen a lithium mine? Destroys thousands of acres. It's open pit mine to get the lithium out." And I said, "And that thing burns more fossil fuel than an F4 Ferrari at full throttle." He said, "How can that be? I'm getting 20 to 39 miles a gallon." I said, "The power plant that charges those batteries burns coal and fuel." Anyway, so we had a little tit for tat about that. And then he told me, he says, "Yeah, you and that diesel, that smog machine." I said, "Yeah, okay, we'll quit here."
Yeah, right.
But he's good. But he's, like I said, he's an amazing guy. He's very creative. He came out of the jewelry industry and started smithing, and he's always had that little creative knack to him. And Skeeter, Skeeter's the world's greatest doctor, blacksmith. I love Skeeter. You can't not like him. I miss Carl Van Arnhem dearly. Yeah. Carl was one of my closest friends and was kind of an older brother spirit guide for me. And he had one of everything known to man to make steel with. He'd have to quit operating on eyeballs he'd have to quit blacksmithing to operate about 3 days before, so his hands wouldn't shake when he was working on your eyes. And he actually saved my life at one point. I was when I broke my neck the first time, I was in so much pain, and I was taking so much chemistry to kill the pain. I don't even remember going to his office. My wife at the time took me over there, and he called another buddy of his over in the hospital, and they had me in the operating room and got me fixed up. And, I wouldn't have probably lived another week if he hadn't fixed me up, and that was about 83 or 4 or something like that.
Huh.
Might have been, no, it was 81. It was 81 because I had the motorcycle wreck in 82. And he was mad at me about that because I pressure tested his first fix. Anyway, so it was 81. So anyway, that's the problem with being a functional psychopath. You break things.
Anybody, they say, "Oh yeah, I have a motorcycle." You say, "Well, when did you have the wreck?"
Yeah.
And they say, "Oh yeah, let me tell you about the wreck."
That's it. I was stuck up in a 70. I was probably the only person in the world that totaled a 72 Oldsmobile with her face. I got face first in the windshield. Got pictures of the car. Motorcycle stuck up in the car like an arrow. I went into the windshield, penetrated the windshield, went out on the street on the other side, and stood up and like, why did you turn in front of me? I was broken all to pieces and didn't know it. Anyway, so I got pictures of me in 2 casts and all that stuff. Anyway, out there straightening a blade with 2 casts on, that's a lot of fun. But no, I wouldn't take for an experience. I said, all you guys that put so much time and effort in it, I really appreciate it. I wish I'd been a little more faithful to the group. Everybody has their regrets, but I just got busy, and that's what happens. And you develop something that you really want to do, and I'm like blinders, because I'm a poster child for ADD. You know, a bird flies by or a phone call, and I'm done for an hour, you know, to get back focused again. So I work better by myself, but I can work in a group, and I'm always a team player. And my motto is if everybody isn't winning, then I don't really want to play with this group. I had a thing happen one time. It was one of those pedagogic repasts, as my friend tells me, and it was a teaching experience. And I made that face that you've seen, that face pattern. It was all made out of junk in my shop, and I showed it to some people. And about a year later, I taught in Europe, and I had a lot of French students, and they called me and they said, "You won't believe what this individual has done with your idea." And I said, "What?" And he says, "Well, he's won this big national award with your idea." And I was young and stupid and got a little incensed about it. And so this was pre-cell phone, text, all that. It was fax. "Dear so-and-so, I heard you won this national award, and if in fact you used my idea, I'm very happy for you. I hope it." And then I got 6 feet of disclaimer, which tells me one thing: I hit a nerve. Had I kept my mouth shut and not said a word and waited till I'd seen the evidence of it, then I would have never had a problem. But I rose to the occasion like a belligerent ass, and so I just kind of like unfriended the person. And then I was in 93 or 94, I was over there for a meeting, and he was in the crowd, and he came running up to show me this knife and the booklet. And he's showing me the knife, and I can't make out what it is, and he shows me the booklet that explains what that is. And you couldn't tell what the image was. It was so distorted you couldn't tell what it was. And had I seen that, I could have circumvented all this other stupid stuff I did as a child, like mine, by feeling like I needed to defend myself. And I got another very, very close friend who was an appellate attorney for many years, and he said, "I got a poem that fits this." And he said, by Rudyard Kipling. And I said, "Okay, give it to me." And he gave it to me. It stuck. I don't remember a lot, but I remember this. He said, "They asked me how I did it. I gave them the scripture text. You keep your light a burning a little ahead of the next. They copied all they could follow, but they couldn't copy my mind, so I left them sweating and stealing a year and a half behind." And there's 2 types of people in this business. There are people that invent, and there are people that copy. And if I invent, then my old ideas are public. You know, I have new ideas. I don't have to wait for somebody to show me that. And that's why I teach, is because I get all this. I'll buy a whole book for a picture, one picture, because it's a nucleus of an idea. Mm-hmm. And we're all riding on the backs of giants. All Yellen and all that bunch that came before, Uri Yaffe, all these guys, and Peter Ross, all the great guys, Alex, Paley, all that bunch. They do phenomenal stuff that I can't even dream of doing. Donna Mylock was one of my friends. She always posted pictures of my knives in her book, but I liked her, and we truly liked each other. I really miss her. I miss her very much. But she always managed to find some way to work my little bit of stuff into her books, and I thought that was great. But no, it's sharing. It's sharing. That's what this whole thing was about. That's what it's supposed to be about. It's not supposed to be some little fiefdom.
So what do you see for the future of this? What would you like to see happen with FABA and just blacksmithing in Florida?
I like And it's like that old man that showed me how to forge a chisel in the 7th grade. I finally got a hold of him. You know, getting a hold of ex-school teachers are like trying to get a hold of an ex-CIA agent. They're protected. They really are protected. You can't get to them. And I had to pull every ace in the hole I had out to find him. And I called that teacher up as Joe Hodge. I hope he's still alive. I said, Mr. Hodge, I said, yes. And I said, were you a middle school teacher at Emma Owsley Junior, 7th grade shop teacher at Emma Owsley Junior High School? He said, yes, I was. I said, this is Steve Schwarzer. I said, do you remember me? He says, oh yeah, I remember you. I said, well, I want to send you something. And I had a book that was published that I helped write by Dr. David Jerome. His book is called Custom Folding Knives. And I wrote a chapter of that book on Mosaic Damascus. And it was a pretty definitive article on it. And I sent him a signed copy of that. And I said, thank you for planting the seed. And he appreciated it. And,
I bet he did.
I just, you know, you never know when you touch somebody what's going to come of it. It's amazing the talent that's out there. I've run into people that got no clue that FABA exists, that are doing phenomenal work. And I always say, well, they'll come to me and say, where can I take a class? I said, these are the guys you need to look up. This is the ones you want to work with. And you got a good crew. I mean, this new program director you got's phenomenal. I really like him. He's working on a tight budget and trying to get stuff done. And the thing is, when you get people in that really know what they're doing, they can work almost nothing. They really can. And you got to be adaptable. If they're a prima donna or an elitist, then go ponder yourself in the corner. I'll give you one little sidebar. Is a funny thing. Is I had a crew out in Montana. They're all famous mosaic makers now, and it's not all for me, but me and Don Fogg went out there and planted the seed. It's a Montana Mafia, and Shane Taylor and Rick Dunkerley and that bunch, and they're all very world famous makers now. And Shane invited me out to the Wagon Wheel Ranch. Well, that ranch is 40 miles from a paved road. And I'm going, what have I done to myself? And a guy drove me out there. We drove and got out there, and there are no trees. It's out in the Badlands. It's nothing. They were raising sheep or goats or something, and cows. And it's like one cow per how many acres out there, because there's like 3 blades of grass. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? And we drove up out there, and there was 40 people standing in the yard waiting on me to do my magic. And there was campers and tents and teepees and all the stuff. And I thought, okay then. And we did it.
Let's have some fun.
Yeah, I went out there several times. I had a ball, and all of them are extremely talented. And what the beauty of that is they're all isolated. So there's nobody telling them you cannot do that. They can't do that. That was the beauty of it. And they did phenomenal stuff. Shane's brother made he wanted a banjo. But it wasn't just a banjo, it was a banjo with pearl inlay and all the stuff. He did that thing. He decided to do it. He did it. And it's unbelievable. There was 9 people in a 200 square mile area. So you had to be friends.
I guess so. So if people wanted to look at your pictures, pictures of your work,
they could. I've got a website that I don't maintain very well. I'm on Facebook a lot with new projects. It's easier maintaining that website. Websites are almost obsolete, but it's steveschwarzer.com, and that's it. And that's basically what I'm doing. I'm designing for a big gun company now, and decided I'd do that. It's one of the things I always wanted to do. Everybody says, well, why would you take a job at 69 years old? Well, it isn't a job. It isn't a job. It's something I want to do, and I'm going to be successful at it, or the urn and the flowers will show up.
So what are you doing for them?
I'm designing knives and putting a production line together. And I'm loving it. Absolutely loving it. It's a great group of people. engineer over there at Henry Gallups. He's just one of the most pleasant people you ever met in your life to work with.
And it's a full variety of knives?
Yeah, I'm gonna do folders and camp knives, airboat knives. It's what they call mid-tech. I do a lot of skinning knives, and I use what the whole idea behind the company is to make a knife like your granddad had that actually cut. That the steel wasn't designed around production. It was a steel designed around cut, and the production has to be designed around the knife.
Yeah, there you go.
And so that the thing actually performs. And if my name's going on it, it's going to cut first. Even my most elaborate mosaic, so all cuts. It's all got cutting edges on it.
Yeah.
Because I don't want it, the joke is I don't want it to wind up in the yard sale 50 years from now and having it pop off like an old carrot in somebody's hand, or going, somebody looking at my knife going, wow, boy, that's a piece of work. It won't cut butter, you know. I couldn't live with it. I'd have to come back out of the grave. But that's about where it's at, and that and airboating and hanging out with my wife, that is my best friend.
Yeah.
Having a ball.
It's a full-time job?
Yeah, and poor little gal, she's been sick. She's got lymphatic leukemia and Lyme's disease.
Oh.
And she starts chemo in 2 weeks. And you look
You
at,
want that on here?
that's why I'm hammering. That's why I'm doing the hammer work out there in her demo, is because she gives out of gas, and she has to keep a cheat sheet there because her short-term memory is in trouble. So you've got an pre-Alzheimer's patient teaching class.
Well,
And you know what? Everybody says, well, aren't you upset? And I said, no. Why be upset about something you can't change? You've got to live with it.
sure.
You know, nobody has to tell you that story. You live with what you got, and you enjoy the time you got. I remember when I was a young man, I thought, boy, if I lost an arm and a leg, I just want to be dead. And when I broke my neck and was paralyzed, I thought, boy, if I can just wink with my right eye, I'll be good.
Oh, crap.
But anyway, that's kind of who I am. That's a, you know.
All right. Well, is there something else I should have asked you?
Now let me look. I'm gonna rejoin Urbana, and I probably need to pay my dues at FABA. So, what was the craziest thing you ever made? I made a bowling ball gun that shoot a 16-pound ball over a mile. My favorite things to make is pattern welding stuff, the high-end folders. I love to make. I like doing patterns that no one else has done, and that's what's kept me broke all these years. Is I pour everything back into the next project because I want to develop that pattern. I want to go down that road, and if somebody tells me it cannot be done, they might as well wave the red flag at me. I'm in it. You know, I've always been a risk taker. That's why everybody says, well, you racing an airboat at 80 miles an hour at 69 years old? I said, yeah, it's an old man's game. All you have to do is sit there and hang on and mash the gas. I want to go out like those guys did on that secondhand lines, upside down in a biplane into a barn. Yeah,